Now let's look at the rules of exponents. And I'm going to divide this into two parts. So this will be part one, and there's a following video, part two. And so let's just first list the rules. And the first rule is simply XA, XB is equal to XA plus B. What is an easy way to remember this example? Let's say you have X3 times X2. And the way that you get that is you just simply, if these are the same base, since these are the same base, then you simply add the exponent. So that's x to the 3 plus 2, or x to the 5th. And the easy way to see that is x to the 3 is simply x times x times x. X squared is x times x. So then you have x times x times x times x times x, which is x to the 5th. The second rule, which is kind of a pair to this rule, is if you have x raised to the power of a raised to the power of b, then you multiply these two together. And again, the easy way to say that is just an example. In fact, all of these, if you're not sure, you can always think of a simple example and usually figure it out. So let's think now that we have x squared raised to the power of 3. Now, what does raising to a power of 3 means? That means take something and multiply it by itself and then multiply it by itself again. So this is going to be x squared times x squared times x squared. That's what x to the cube means. What is x squared? X times x. So it's literally x times x times x times x times x times x. And x times x times x times x times x times x is just x to the 6th. And the third rule, which is kind of it follows along these more or less. Let's see if a times b raised to the power of n. Well, when you have something in parentheses raised to a power, then what you do is you raise every single thing in this parentheses to that power. So this would be a to the n times b to the n. Let's look at an example of that one. So an example of that one is you have 2x cubed y raised to the power of 4. That would be 2 raised to the 4th. And then that's x cubed raised to the 4th. And then it's y raised to the 4th. Two to the 4th is 2 times 2 times 2 times 2. 2 times 2 is 4, times 2 is 8, times 2 is 16, so that's simply 16. Now, x3 raised to the 4th, we use this rule number 2. So that's x3 raised to the 4th, that's x3 times 4, that's x to the 12th. And y to the 4th is just y to the 4th. And the fourth rule is that we're really just going to state is simply this, is that we're going to define a to the negative m to be 1 over a to the m. And let's look at an example of that. So if you have x to the minus 5, that simply means 1 over x to the 5th. And that's easy enough. It's a little bit harder for some students when you have the x on the bottom in the denominator. If you have 1 over x to the minus 3, literally that would be 1 over x to the 3rd, but that's just x to the 3rd. So a way to think about it, at least the way that I think about it, is if you have a negative exponent, what that means is that the power, or whatever the term is with that power, is in the wrong place. If it's in the top, in the numerator, it should go in the denominator, but if it's the denominator to start with, then it should go in the numerator. So let's just go to some examples here, right? Some examples. Let's say you have 2x to the 3rd times 10. Let's do this in parentheses. 10x to the 3rd squared. Well, here, the first is you have the parentheses first. There's nothing to do inside the parentheses here. You have a power and you have multiply. Which do you do, a power or multiply? Well, by the rules of PEMDAS, Then we always do the power first, so that's 10 squared, which is 100. x3 squared, what's x3 squared? That's this rule right here, right? So we multiply the 3 and the 2, so that's x to the 6th. So you have 2x to the 3rd times 100x to the 6th. 2 times 100 is 200. x3 times x6 is x to the 9th. Let's look at another example. Let's like 4x squared, y to the minus 3 raised to the minus 2. Well, if we notice the third rule number 3, if you have something in parentheses raised to a power, then you raise everything in the parentheses to that power. So that's going to be 4 to the minus 2. And then x squared to the minus 2. And then y to the minus 3 to the minus 2. 4 to the minus 2, that's 16, but it's 1 over 16, right? The negative means it's in the denominator, and so it's 1 over 4 squared, right? Literally, 4 to the minus 2 is 1 over 4 squared, which is 1 over 16. X squared raised to the minus 2, you multiply those two, so that'll be x to the minus 4th. Y to the minus 3 raised to the minus 2, and negative times negative is a positive, that's y to the 6th. Let's rewrite that. You have the 16 in the denominator. X to the minus 4, that means that's in the denominator. Y to the 6 would be in the numerator. And that's your answer right there. So that's the first 4 rules of exponents. The next video will simply be called Exponent Rules, Part 2. So watch the follow-up video.